discussion around International Youth Day. And one of the questions I will ask immediately, what exactly is International Youth Day? And of course, it is an awareness day designated by the United Nations. And the purpose of the day is to draw attention to a given set of cultural and legal issues surrounding youth. It was first celebrated in 2000, so it's 20 years that we're into this, that we've been celebrating youth, and we understand the importance of youth as well in so many sectors, in so many regions across the globe, and their contributions are being seen now as being so essential. Of course, my name is Darrion, and I'll be the moderator here with you all this afternoon. I am the Vice Chair Inclusion and Engagement on the Commonwealth Youth Council, and I'm an activist as well here in Trinidad and Tobago and the wider Caribbean region. However, I would like to hand over the mic at this moment to, of course, the man who's in charge of putting together this event here for us this afternoon, Mr. Kareem Charles, the Vice President of the UWI St. Augustine Guild. So Kareem, I'm passing the ball over to you right about now, just to give us a little bit more insight and some welcome remarks. Kareem, all over to you.
Thank you, Darrion, and a special good afternoon and welcome to all of our viewing audience. Special shout out to students of the Keyville campus. I know you are locked on to view your vice president as well, who is included in this panel. And welcome again to our virtual symposium. As Darrion mentioned, this symposium today is in commemoration of International Youth Day. Today we will be discussing socio-economic issues affecting the youth in our region. Just permit me to provide a bit of context as to why we are having this symposium today. According to Vice Chancellor Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, the University of the West Indies' primary mandate is to serve in the advancement of the Caribbean community and sustain its development. The United Nations has noted that the youth are a major human resource for development and the key agents for social change, economic growth, and technological innovation. However, various studies highlight the widening gap between youth and community, national and regional development in the context of policy planning, political participation, consultation, and national decision-making. As a result of this marginalization, a wide sector of the youth population has become disenfranchised and disinterested in contributing to the development process. This serves to be detrimental as the youth have a critical role in shaping and determining the advancement of the future. Now, this discussion today becomes particularly important as where we find ourselves on a national landscape in a post-election era. Now, forgetting the former things that would have gone before and looking towards the future, we must now begin addressing issues that are pertinent to us as youth and providing solutions on the way forward in advancing our nation and region at large. Thank you and welcome again. And I hope you do enjoy and have a fruitful discussion today. Thank you. Back to you, moderator.
Thank you so much for that, Kareem. And of course, some very essential and important points coming out there. Political participation being one, as we've just come out of the cusp of an election here in Trinidad and Tobago. And we saw the youth vote really having a serious importance inside there. We know that the youth contributions as well to the economic sustainability of a country, of a region is so essential. And of course, we know that in less than a month, we'll also have another regional election coming up in Jamaica on September 3rd. So we're also looking forward to that and the importance of the youth vote there and the importance of youth participation as well. And as we're moving along and we're speaking about that, I want to talk and introduce somebody here who has been involved in youth work for years, and his contributions have been so noteworthy. His contributions have been excellent. He's inspired, and in fact, I believe he's inspired a lot of people on this chat right now, on this panel right now, himself with the work that he's been doing, etc. So I'm really happy to have him here. He's somebody who I appreciate as well, and who I always love to have discussions with. So I'm happy that he has agreed to be part of this panel here this evening, to be the keynote speaker as well. So let me just give his brief bio. Amilcar Sanatan is an artist, academic, and activist. He's a PhD candidate in cultural studies at the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus. His research interests include Men and Masculinities in the Caribbean, Youth and Student Development, and Cultural Geography. Sanatan serves as the Trinidad and Tobago representative for the Commonwealth Students Association and coordinator of the UWI Socialist Conference. And I'm so happy. That's to put it mildly, if I must say so myself. This guy, that's a humble bio he has submitted there. His bio goes much more extensive, and he's a man filled with a lot of knowledge. And I'm happy to pass the baton to him right about now as he gives his keynote address. Amilcar, over to you.
I'll take it up with Darrion after for that lengthy introduction about me, you know what I mean? But I hope I do live up to his, proclamations about my abilities. But I'd also like to give thanks to Kareem Charles, whom invited me to be a part of this forum. I respectfully declined because I'm an old man now. I'm 31 years old. And what does that mean? Is that I think that part of our movement is also including ourselves by taking ourselves out. But it's also about taking up space. When we see women, when we see LGBTQ youth, when we see poor youth or youth from working class backgrounds, that is about taking up space. So it's interesting how we move in and out. And I really appreciate that he still reached out to me and said, Amilcar, you could speak as an older youth in the movement to share some remarks about your experiences as a youth. And it is in that capacity I will make a contribution today. So I'm very grateful to the Guild of Students, the Commonwealth Youth Council, the Trinidad Youth Council, and my esteemed comrade Shanice Webb, who was instrumental to the leadership in the Youth COVID-19 Response Initiative. Thank you very much, and greetings to everyone. The theme for this year's International Youth Day is Youth Engagement for Global Action. I ask, what do politics look like in a pandemic world? The discipline of geography offers us answers that do not apply only to mapping studies that trace the spread of disease, or force us to think about the direction and miles of goods and services, such as food. Geographic knowledge empowers youth activists and social movement builders to think through the concept of scale. All scales matter. What we do on our campuses, communities, nation, region, and global spaces of action and debate feed into each other. Yet, in the Caribbean, we still contend with the fetishization of international spaces and validation, or as Rastas accurately describe, the outer national community. For many people, development and collective achievement rest solely on our proximity to the indicators and image of societies outside. Outside meaning Europe and the United States. International spaces are not proof of our worthiness. It is a site where our ideas contend with other communities of the world. It is an opportunity for us to access information and resource networks that can be redirected to our national and regional spaces. And most importantly, it is a space where we take part in global debates that may not be happening in our home countries, while we contribute to international discussions and decisions that are geographically imbalanced and do not include our realities. So youth representation in the Commonwealth has less to do with making your country proud when you stand next to the Queen of England, and more to do with building stronger relationships with Asian and African democracies that are fighting for a future of self-determination. Think of scale. The United Nations proclaimed 2015 to 2024 as the International Decade for People of African Descent. This recognition has given greater visibility and legitimacy to those critical of international development and the guaranteeing of rights for African peoples. In this decade, after all the social movements, the issue of a 7-year-old wearing dreadlocks in school is a question for Jamaica's Supreme Court to decide. Not too long ago, Belize and Trinidad and Tobago were confronted with this same question. Right now, the fires to the buildings and symbols of oppression like Columbus may have appeared to be cool, but all around the world, the movement for racial justice has been youth-led and organized to give dignity to Black life and challenge the practices of state violence against their people, police brutality, and the bestiality of right-wing regimes that put their people out to die in the name of economics. Men are hiding from public discussions, on the retreat on WhatsApp groups of misogyny, afraid of the world, knowing about their violations against women because women have selected justice over silence. And as more women step forward to speak about their ways to get their rights and the ways that they have been violated, more men are also called to step forward and break the impunity of perpetrators, to hold other men accountable, to put on the agenda for students in our national community that sexual harassment is a form of violence against schoolgirls, and this is a political issue, an election issue, a campaign issue, and an inequality we have to end. This moment has shown us how much truth and temperament mattered behind our tweets. Intellectual rigor and research mattered behind our righteous positions. Political integrity and patience mattered behind our posturing and positions on stage. And responsiveness and relationships mattered when a movement rises and the function of influencers and inside strategies change. I said it before and I will say it again. All scales matter. All scales matter because the fight to free our girls from child marriage in Trinidad and Tobago calls us to the fight to challenge the arguments of legalized child labor in Belize. How do these issues feed into our day-to-day lives? Take a look at our recently completed general elections. To be a student of Trinidad and Tobago politics, one must be a student of Guyanese politics. Each generation must fight to protect peace and promote understanding in our multiracial post-colonial democracies. If there's anything we have learned about the elections in Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago, is that the youth are not naturally at the forefront of racial progress. That the political parties are not the problem entirely because we drive divisiveness too. That all parties are the same is a falsehood because parties do lead different platforms and have different track records, especially in the management of the economy. And last, that engaging youth with more information does not always translate to higher youth turnout at the polls. We need sustained youth political action before, during, and after elections. Political work is not nice and neither is it easy. We need to coordinate and mobilize youth and develop a presence at joint select committees in Parliament as much as we strive to host Zoom webinars with no follow-up reports or press releases in the media. We must produce strong content that can be accessed in online and print formats about our priorities, but we should also work to inform and create communication channels with leaders of party youth wings, nationally and regionally, for them to speak to the examples of youth work, the work that all of you all are doing on this live, the panelists in this chat, the youth work happening to their national executives. One day after our general elections was over, a young Venezuelan woman was raped and left in the bushes in Trinidad and Tobago. Our work continues. For International Youth Day, I want us to reflect on our movement and realign the aims of our cause, realign some of the persons in its leadership, and select targets for our action. Do we continue with hierarchies of power in our organizations, or do we support those with the most capacity to deliver on objectives? Do we continue to rely on titles and positions, or do we employ the radical imagination for our portfolios of responsibility? Do we continue with a conception of the Caribbean that has one linguistic zone, or do we communicate in Spanish and French, build relationships with Latin America, and play catch-up with our comrades in Suriname, Curacao, and Haiti? Do we continue to draw straight lines to leaders, or do we see persons who hold organizational power as guiding a movement for a time? Do we continue to work now so that we become consultants and profit from our cause? Or do we see ourselves as a committed generation that will never let go of an activist spirit in high, middle, and low places? Do we continue to run our mouths about youth this and youth that and check the ages of our leaders? Or do we assess the politics and decisions of who is and who is not a champion of youth development? As a socialist, I have never been more proud in any other moment in my life because it is the left, with their defense of feminism, the environment, public health care, racial justice, and people over banks who have saved lives and pushed back against the prophets of doom and misery and their neoliberal economics. I urge all of you to build a more social Trinidad and Tobago, a more social Caribbean and Latin America region, a more social global community. It was Federico Garcia Lorca who reflected on the duty of the poet. His words push us into action in these times. Más cerca de la muerte que de la filosofía, más cerca del dolor que de la inteligencia, más cerca de la sangre que de la tinta. Closer to death than to philosophy, closer to pain than to intelligence, closer to blood than to ink. We struggle to defend life, to eliminate the conditions and structures of social death. We struggle to deliver material guarantees and hope when all around is grief and uncertainty. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amilcar, for that. That was a very, very solid delivery there, highlighting some very, very key issues. And I just had to take a moment to sit back in my seat and really internalize even what I have been doing in this space. And I hope everybody else on the panel as well took that time to internalize what they've been doing just off the bat with what was said and what was delivered. Some of the key takeaways I took from that immediately was this tokenism that we see around youth participation in all these spaces, and even how we get caught in the trap of the older heads and the older folks as well. And boy, I had to take a deep breath in, because we see that happening so often and so regularly. That we fall into the same traps of the same racial divides, of the same, and as you mentioned, they're coming down to the end, the attention, the movement towards that, looking for the fame as opposed to doing the actual work on the ground. And I think that that's a call for all youth leaders, for all youth within spaces, to really examine, one, their privileges, and two, but also to examine self and the work that you're doing and the delivery of the work that you're doing as well. You know, this, as you said, there are youth movements existing without the official spaces that have been set up that are really leading the charge in terms of on the ground activism. And what are we doing within these organizations that we participate in, that we are part of, to really lead or be the voice of that on the ground activism, that real activism. And to be quite honest, a lot of times, a lot of these various organizations as well are so far apart or so distant from the grassroots movements. You know, and you see that divide inside there in terms of the development of policy. The way that they do is not always a very inclusive space. So Amilcar, I want to take this opportunity to say thank you so much for that keynote address. You have me reflecting on my own privileges within this space immediately. And I hope that everybody takes that time out as well here to reflect upon that. One thing that you mentioned as well was, of course, the politics and youth political participation, and for it not to be taken as just a by the way or a fly-by-night kind of movement, but for it to really be real and for it to really be solid and for people to really recognize it and relate it, etc. But for it to not be, again, this whole tokenism ideology, but to move away from that and for us to take up the spaces that are opening or to grab spaces as well, essentially away from people who should not be there any longer, who are pushing certain divides within society, whether it be racial, whether it be ethnic, whether it be class, etc. And I want to move immediately into our next topic based off of that. I thought that was an excellent keynote to flow into the continued discussion that we're going to have here, the central discussion that we're going to have here. And that is, of course, the importance of youth participation in the political process. So I want to introduce our first presenter to come after our keynote address there given by Mr. Amilcar Sanatan. But our first presenter here to continue the conversation is of course a very strong and a very powerful woman in her own regard as well, Solange Des Vignes. And Solange Des Vignes is of course the acting president of the Political Science Society in the University of the West Indies. She's currently a final year student at the University of the West Indies campus, pursuing a bachelor's degree in political science with a double minor in international relations and psychology. Having a passion for politics and taking an active interest in the phenomena of the global community, Solange is proud to be the current acting president of the UWI's Political Science Society. Her current goals are to continue developing her knowledge of the political arena within her country and be a voice for the youth within this realm in the near future. So I'm really happy that she's taken her time out to be part of this discussion here with us this afternoon. And I know that she will have a lot of insight to bring as well. And we're always very happy to have a panel that is balanced as well, because we see many female leaders on this panel. And I always see that as being so essential, because oftentimes in the political landscape, we don't see that female political participation being to the level where it should be at. So Solange, I'm very happy that you've come on board to share your expertise here with us. And I'm going to, at this moment, pass the ball over to you.
Thank you so much, Darrion. Good afternoon to my fellow panelists. I am Solange Des Vignes, and I'm absolutely elated to be here with you all to discuss really the importance of youth participation within the political arena and our contribution towards the holistic development of our society. So today, I would really like to focus on the strong impact that the youth can have in changing the dynamic of politics in the Caribbean as we see it today. Hopefully, I can also enlighten some of the youth that may be watching and are currently unaware of the potential power that they hold in safeguarding a brighter future, not only for their respective country, but for the region as a whole. So together, we can affect positive social change. We just need to be cognizant and involved within the affairs of our government. We must be actively engaged in our civic duty in order to ensure that our interests and needs are met. We are the ones responsible for bridging the gap between our youth and the wider society. So firstly, I'll begin by asking you all, who represents the youth? Now, the United Nations clearly defines the youth age brackets as individuals ranging from 15 to 24, but they also recognize that this can include persons up to the ages of 30, even 35 in some regions. Now, this is a much wider range than what the average citizen would consider to be youth. But this is important for us to understand, as our strength lies within our numbers. Engagement within the political process does not only simply consist of casting our votes in a local or general election. It also encompasses understanding the implications of who we are voting for, what their aims and proposed policies are. We must understand the feasibility of implementing said policies, whether it be in the areas of health, education, the arts, science and technology, the environment, etc. We need to seek out which policies are specifically geared towards youth enhancement and use all of these factors to make informed and directed decisions. We need to be the ones to hold our government accountable and transform the narrative that we are too young to have our voices and concerns heard. Political culture within our region is relevant to time and place. The values transmitted from one generation to another do not necessarily have to be adhered to in its purest form. What I mean by this is that societal norms are ever evolving, and in order to effectively develop, we need to move along with it. We can be the change that the region needs in diverting from racism and tribalism within our political atmosphere. As we all know, this is deeply rooted within our Caribbean political culture, as it is grounded in the legacy of colonialism. It provides the fundamental basis of tribal influence within our political behavior. Now, this change cannot happen overnight. It's not that simple. But if a conscientious effort is made, especially by our generation, we can construct the pathway for the generations 10, 20, even 30 years ahead of us. There's no better time than now to ignite a flame within the majority of our youth. We should be able to impart and receive knowledge from one another. Bring out that burning passion that I know we all have within us. Bring forth the dynamism within our region and keep elevating the momentum as we move towards a brighter tomorrow. A chain reaction can start, and it all begins simply with awareness. We can be the ones to alter the reality of the divisive nature and the influence of segregation imparted on us from the plantation economy and society and our history of class stratification. Now, the ball doesn't stop rolling there. The younger generation must answer the call to step up to the plate. We need to also be more prominent within the areas of candidacy. We need youth as representatives. We need youth as political analysts. We need to fight against this ideology that we are too young to make strides within our own political environments, so that we can not only be heard, but respected as educated individuals. Those of us who are specializing in fields of the study dedicated towards politics, we need to push ourselves to become the policy drivers for the future. I mean, who better to do it than us? We need a fresh perspective. Every corner of politics needs to be represented by the youth. If not, then how can the decision-making process and the policies involved reflect our unique needs? What better way to drive our development than to be heavily involved ourselves? We have to make that leap of faith, whether it be joining existing political organizations or stepping out to create our own. Let us take, for example, Nikolai Edwards of the Progressive Party in Trinidad and Tobago, the youngest party leader that the country has ever seen. He should be a shining example to those of us who want to go out there and get involved. While yes, I mean, we still maintain a two-party majoritarian electoral system, this doesn't mean that we can't start planting the seeds of change we want to see for the future and possibly shift the voting patterns of our own country. I mean, let's look back at the 2015 general election. The youth bracket actually made up around 31% of the total voter turnout. I mean, that must count for something, especially if we shift towards voting with as a well-informed citizen rather than what major political party or family aligns themselves with. I strongly believe that Mr. Edwards and his vision will be a force to be reckoned with in the upcoming years, and I'm very much anticipating the growth and development of his party in the near future. Many of the older folks claim that, again, he is too young, but too young at 28? Blasphemy. The youth today have more opportunities to build upon through education. We are becoming increasingly aware of our rights and what needs to be done, not only for our development, but for development of our state. With this, there are still many hurdles, that we have to overcome, whether it be at an organizational level, whether it be at a structural level, or even an individual level. Many youth currently involved in the political sphere feel like they're silenced. The older generation tends to look at us through a distorted lens. We are being told we do not have enough experience or that we aren't mature enough to make informed decisions. But humbly, in my opinion, we are not being given the precise opportunities needed to gain said experience. We need to defy the expectations that the older generations hold over us, and in doing so, support one another. Find mentors within the political environment and stick together. We can no longer be disenchanted by the idea of involving ourselves in the political realm. Politics is involved in every single aspect of our lives, and complacency is our natural born enemy. And you ultimately silence your own input and expression when you blatantly choose not to participate in your country's political affairs. The youth as a whole cannot afford to be apathetic towards politics. We need to be driven. We need to be diligently involved. And education is the first vital key. Let us stray away from family being our main agent of political socialization. Let us take the active interest for ourselves. Let us demand educational reform so that, we learn a lot more about the political process at a secondary school level, giving us a deeper insight that is mostly overlooked within our education system. We need a campaign for youth advocacy, and we need to demand inclusion within these political and social settings. This is crucial in order for us to stray away from being marginalized within our society. Our contributions within government affairs can bring the true essence of democracy to life. I strongly believe this. So let us immerse ourselves into the core of legislative and policy framework so that we can make our way securing a seat in the formal decision-making procedures. Overall, we need to establish a continuum with regard to youth participation, and it starts with each and every one of us. Let us change the narrative of tokenism within the political arena and do away with the illusions of meaningful participation. We hold the ability to empower ourselves. So let us take that potential seriously and march forward in confidence towards a promising and prosperous future. Thank you, everyone.
Solange, I expected nothing less than that powerful presentation that you just delivered there. Quoting with, of course, substantiating it with facts, which I see has been so essential in this environment as well. And giving your suggestions and your insight, which I see has been so essential. And you raised something that stood out for me almost immediately as you started, and that is the participation of youth as political analysts as well. And one of the things that we've noted and that we've seen, and if you were watching election coverage over the last couple nights, and of course on the election night as well, it was a whole set of old people who were the analysts there, right? A whole set of old people sitting on a table, boring, right, as well. So no vibrancy on top of that, right? And seeing things that anybody could have sit down there and say. So even the depth and the level of analysis wasn't there for me, in my opinion, in a lot of the cases there. But of course, no youth, or the youth that were included in these panels, right, were just there for tokenism. It wasn't even on the actual issues. So you had nobody analyzing the breakdown of the seats. It had nobody analyzing the political landscape and measuring it against what is happening in terms of like the manifestos, etc., the campaign promises. This wasn't the thing. It was so tokenistic, right? And I'm talking about all the mainstream stations that were broadcasted across the entire nation. And for me, one of the things I oftentimes believe in is when there's no space, or they want to exclude us from these spaces, then create your own space, right? And that's so essential. Create your own space and make so much noise that they have no choice but to include you in those discussions as well, but to bring you as a political analyst, because I've heard so many different young people offering so much insight in terms of their analytical skills, etc., along the way, around elections, that went far beyond just this tokenistic kind of thing that we see coming to the forefront very often. So I'm very happy that you raised that, and I'm very happy that you spoke about that. And I'm hoping that the next presenter could actually continue what you've been saying, Solange, and build on it as well, as I introduce Mr. Taahir Bulbulia. He's the Vice President of the UWI Guild of Students 2020-2021. Taahir is a 21-year-old final year sports science student at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus. He's from the beautiful country of Barbados, which is known for its friendly people, its beaches, its sunshine all year round. And of course, it's also known for one of my favorite prime ministers, Mia Mottley, right? So I'm very happy to have him on board here. Taahir is the founder of the Sports Science Society, which is a student-based organization on campus. He founded the society in his tenure as the faculty of sport representative on Cave Hill's Student Government Guild. Taahir has also served as the president of the Islamic Student Society on campus. This year, he now serves as the vice president of the student government. He believes highly in the promotion of voluntarism and unity amongst his peers. Taahir is an avid sports fan, playing cricket, football, and road tennis, which is a native sport to Barbados. Taahir has won various awards, but most notably, in 2019, he was awarded by the Barbados Youth Development Council for his service to sport and community development. Taahir is an advocate for sport development and youth participation at the national level in Barbados. So Taahir, we're very happy to have you on board. Of course, we know that regional integration is a very important aspect of youth development as well, and of course of our own development within our various countries within the Caribbean. So Taahir, I'm very happy to have somebody who's not Trinidadian on this panel as well to share their insights. And I'm going to hand it over to you right now, and hopefully as a sports enthusiast, you can hit them for 6.
Hi, good evening all, and it's an honor to be on this panel. First of all, let me big up Kareem for having me. One of my good friends, met him last year at in the Skill Council meetings at St. Augustine. But let me just put a disclaimer out there, right? I was born in Trinidad and I live in Barbados all of my life. So it's okay, but I'm a Bajan born and bred. And just it's an honor, definitely an honor to be with everyone. The experience on this guild is on this panel is amazing. To hear Solange speak and Ancillar speak, it truly speaks to what the youth are doing and the work youth participation at national level is taking place. The output of students that University of the West Indies is putting out there is also amazing. So I must commend everyone for the work they're doing, and let's continue developing the spaces that we are in and working together. And as you said, regional integration is big. And I must mention, UWI is the capital of regional integration. They talk about CARICOM, but let's look at the work UWI has done. UWI is where different persons from different countries, backgrounds, races come together and unite. The vibe you get at UWI, you can't get anywhere else, honestly. You meet friends for life. And to continue after Solange is pretty difficult because she touched on some amazing points. I took a lot over what I was gonna say. So it's amazing. So it's good to see that youth are thinking alike. Oftentimes when we talk about youth in the political process, it only comes up around election time when they want us to speak on the campaign trail and when they want our votes. But it goes further than this. The political process at a government level is, as long as you're in tenure, as long as you're in power, that's the political process. And you must involve youth in every step and every direction that you are going and every decision you are going to make at a national level. Because of oftentimes we see in the Caribbean, persons sitting in power for a long time and they have no knowledge of what's taking place in 2020. We see 1980 systems still in 2020. You name it, the education system, it's a 1980 system working in 2020. We have to now begin to put our voices out there and come together. But how are we going to do this? How, as youth, are we going to do this? Solange and Ancillary spoke about the fact that they don't like to include the youth into the dialogue, into the national dialogue, because, oh, we're inexperienced, oh, we can't have a voice. But how now do we navigate this? How do we now build this? It starts from within ourselves. We have to be the change that we want to see. We have to be the change that we want to see. It starts from within our communities. It starts from within our circles. It starts from within our spaces around us. We have to be that change. So how do we build this change? We go within the communities, get out there, engage with various other youth, and see what issues they are facing. We often hear about violence, gun violence, drugs, sex, rape, all types of different issues they're facing out there. But we as youth understand this, and we have to understand the issues other youth are facing. So we have to go into communities and build out the change that we want to see. When we begin to build this change that we want to see and bring an effect onto people and bringing people to see that they're not that bad, they're not that bad. They have to have a space where they can come into. And us as youth, we have to provide this space, because far too many times going back to the education system, we say the education system has failed us, but that's why we're seeing youth on the street. But then again, we have to go and be the change that we want to see. And this would then begin to, once you start to build the change from the bottom coming up, then you will see the persons at the top beginning to fall into place, because they can't do all the work. The government, we can't sit down and wait on the government to do all the work. We have to go out there and within our circles, we have to go out there within our communities and build out and assist and help and put programs into place to aid them, whether it be through sports, whether it be through the arts, whether it be through culture, whether it be through farming, whatever. You have to provide these opportunities and spaces for the youth to grow and the youth to develop. And until this is done from us, the youth, and being the forebearers and the forerunners, then the change will not be seen at the top, because we all know they're stuck in their ways. Far too many times we say we have to wait on the minister, we have to wait on our parliamentary representative, but no, we have to go out there and build up that community, build up that spirit. And that's one thing that the Caribbean has. We often pride ourselves on the community. That we often say a community raises a child, but we are now going away from this and seeing our children falling through the cracks. But we have to now go back to this, our core value of a community, and build out a community in our spaces where then the youth can begin to grow, where the youth can begin to learn, where the youth can begin feel like they're being heard. So I think that the community is of utmost importance for development, and this is where now the political process for us begin. We have to begin at the bottom and find our way to the top. Moving on, the second point is that we have to build out programs and initiatives that are sustainable, because in the Caribbean, we are stuck in our ways. It is a fact. We rely too heavily and put a lot of our eggs in one basket. For instance, in Barbados, we base our economy on tourism. And in Trinidad, they base their economy on oil. But when that does not take place, and COVID has taught us that when tourism fails us, what will we rely on for income? We have to now look to develop our spaces and develop our economies, that the youth coming up who are creative and innovative, and we have the ideas of how we can develop. I would have made mention previously in another panel is that Barbados is now 53 years independent, and we are known on the world stage already. We cannot simply continue to use systems that were used 20 years ago. It's a new time. We now have to begin to develop. We are known on the world stage. We've made it on the world stage, whether it be through sports, but we need to now build out our economies and develop our economies and develop our countries. And then that is when we're truly going to get to the first world countries. We often say we want to be like the first world countries, but we have to begin to think. Our mindset has to begin to think like the first world countries and develop our avenues and our economies and our spaces to be like the first world countries, genuinely speaking from my heart. Because in Barbados, the issue is that if tourism is not bringing in money for the economy, it's not much. Right now, we are struggling. Our country is struggling. We started our 12-month stamp, which is going to bring back some form of tourism into the country. But if we look at different opportunities and different avenues for development, which will be youth-led, definitely we can form a new way of our economy, whether it be through sport development, whether it be through the cultural arts. We have singers. We have Machel Montano, world renowned. We have West Indies cricket team, Karen Pollard, Dwayne Bravo. People just know Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados and the Caribbean for these things. So imagine if we were really to flesh out our economy and the youth understand this. Collaborations are important. We have to work together. If Solange is working on a goal and I'm working on something, let's together and build it out. We see it at the top that for so many times the Ministry of Youth has something, the Ministry of Sport has something similar, and there's no collaboration. We have to be the change that we want to see. We have to be the change that we want to see. So let us work together and build out. And these conversations like these are important. KFL is in this discussion, St. Augustine. People from different backgrounds are within this discussion, and we are all working together for youth development and to build out a better country, a better Caribbean, and a better world at the end of the day. So when we work within our spaces, we build out our communities. When we work within our spaces, we build out our country. When the community benefits, the country benefits. When the country benefits, we have to look at things that the Caribbean benefits. And thereafter, we look at the whole wider picture of the world benefiting from the work we start within our communities. I hope I spoke to the thing. I really enjoyed the discussion thus far. Big up Kareem once again. And thank you once again for having me. And Darrion, over to you, Chair.
Taahir, thank you so much for your contributions there. And you know, one of the things that we see that you highlighted there and reiterated, of course, is that whole idea and ideology around community engagement and the importance of community engagement as well, which we see as being so essential. Of course, the creation and development of spaces and diversification being some of the key points that you brought to the forefront there. And all of these are so essential in these youth movements, in these youth-led organizations. This needs to be our focus. In fact, we had a comment as well coming out from our guild president. He says the youth are inclined to continue the trends of old and must shake free from it. We see too many signs of it. Now is the time. Pull up your brethren and your sistren. And I felt as if you were talking about that as well. You know, being able to when you see something that doesn't fit the proper moral code or proper ethical code as well, to pull up those people to correct them, to develop the spaces where they can learn as well. I see that as being so essential and so important along the way. Of course, we want to encourage you all to shoot your questions on the Facebook Live. We are looking at them, we are watching them, and of course these panelists, these esteemed panelists before me here, will answer them and will share their knowledge and insights as well. So pass those questions along, bring them along. We welcome them with open arms and we will be ready. But Taahir, as you were talking about community engagement, I feel as if you segued properly and very well into our next topic, which is actually going to be around civic action as a catalyst for social change. And allow me now to welcome our next speaker, our speaker who is going to come to the forefront here, and that is, of course, Cindy Andrews, who is the PRO for Caribbean Women in Leadership Trinidad and Tobago chapter. Cindy Ann Andrews is a youth leader and advocate hailing from the sister Isle of Tobago. Ms. Andrews is currently pursuing her BSc in Psychology Special at the University of the West Indies while balancing several executive portfolios in national and regional organizations. As a former youth parliamentarian, Cindy maintains an active role in youth governance and leadership and advocates and assists in providing solutions on the issues of youth in education reform, access to social services, and youth in the economy. Her work within these portfolios is closely aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals: 4, quality education; 5, and gender equality; and 10, reduced inequalities. Cindy also uses the art form of spoken word poetry to advocate and raise awareness of issues such as crime and violence and mental health. And I'm so happy that Cindy has come on board with us here this afternoon as well, because I know her personally and I've worked with her before, and I know that she has an exceptional work ethic and exceptional insight as well. And I'm so happy that she's going to be bringing a perspective from our sister Isle as well, which I see as being so essential in these discussions. And of course, it goes much far beyond that, and she also has a wide scope examining our social situations across the Caribbean, in Trinidad and in Tobago. So Cindy, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'm looking forward to your discussions around civic engagement. Over to you, Cindy.
Thank you so much, Darrion, for that healthy introduction. I feel a little bit of pressure now to ensure I maintain the quality of contributions that would have been presented by my colleagues. Now, I was smiling from ear to ear when each of them presented, because it really spoke to what our featured speaker Amilcar said in terms of the interconnectedness of issues, not only nationally, but across the Caribbean. Because Taahir would have stolen my entire introduction using the Mahatma Gandhi quote without even getting a little peek of my presentation. So I'm here and I'm like, this is just amazing how like-minded individuals, when they come together, they often tap into similar knowledge, similar sources of philosophy in order to bring forward their contribution. So I'll start. We cannot wish to see change and not start with ourselves. And this goes back to Gandhi's quote that in order to actually have change occur, we must be the change that we wish to see in the world. And this simply underscores the importance of the self in social movements. I, like each of you here, play an integral role in carrying forward any movement or cause simply because I have decided that I will actively play a role in creating, adapting, and learning from others to provide solutions to issues which directly or indirectly affect me and members of our society. Our duty, however, as individuals is not simply to say that we are good and dream of good changes happening, but to also do the good that we see and dream. It starts with you, and then it moves into finding a community of like-minded individuals who are willing to champion the cause and the causes through the storms and the resistance that will be met along the way. Now, a lot of us touched on community within different aspects of our presentation, and it's really important to note that although that one step forward starts with you, the individual, or I, the individual, we push forward, and our potential and ability to do more is amplified when we come together in groups and organizations that share understanding of community need. And I remember one of my colleagues would have touched on the disconnect that occurs when persons often go into communities at a higher level and are not able to connect with the actual needs of what the members of the community needed. And I remember I did a Commonwealth training some years ago, and it was something that I would have met Amilcar at this training, and he would probably remember one of these things that they said, and it was that when we go into communities, oftentimes we experience a disconnect when we try to provide solutions for the people without first identifying and discussing with the people what it is exactly that we need. So we find ourselves pouring out resources, pouring out volunteerism, pouring out what we think is the passion and the desire and the necessary solution to the issues, when in reality we have not engaged these people, we have not spoken to them, we have not listened to them, and we have not understood or communicated with them to grasp what is the actual issue, what is the actual problem, and how we can empower them to find solutions and not just provide them with a temporary fix. And I know we spoke about the possibility and the potential for sustainability. And this is something as that Taahir would have spoken about in terms of as the Caribbean, we often don't think about the sustainability of our activities, of the plans and programs and the initiatives that we implement. And I think moving forward, what is something that we have to note as the generation of leaders now tasked with transitioning into this management of engagement and empowerment within the COVID-19 pandemic is how we continue to, one, engage persons when we are now restricted by this COVID-19 pandemic. We are not able to meet in physical spaces in the large capacities that would have allowed us to increase our output and outreach in communities. So we now have to get creative. We now have to become more strategic. We now have to become more intentional in how we engage persons and how we view the consequences of that intentional engagement and the ripple effects that Solange would have spoken about when you actively start engaging in a discussion, when you actively start engaging and seeking to address an issue. It is said that the only thing in life that is constant is change. And when you look at how civic action facilitates social change, it really makes you think whether or not you are actually a part of the process. Because if the only thing in life that is constant is change, it really makes you wonder if you have any power. But you really have to come to the understanding and understand that you can actively participate in the process of change, even if it is something that is ever evolving within your society. And I think Solange would have also said that we have to go with it. We cannot remain stagnant within our various portfolios, within our various mindsets when we try to engage persons within our community. And when we look at civic action and civil movements, we must remember that in the Caribbean, women's role in social change and transformation has not been widely recorded or discussed. Women have been actively part of revolutions as well as having led the forefront in several spheres. When we look at women like Nani of the Maroons out of Jamaica, or Jacqueline Creft, one of the leaders of the People's Revolutionary Government in Grenada, we also have Hazel Brown and Cotille Walcott in Trinidad and Tobago, who would have organized domestic workers, even though they are not as well known in the region. We must also pay attention and change the narrative that often marginalize some groups, some minorities, some people from being able to actually be recognized for the participation and the contributions that they would have made across the time and space that they would have existed in. Now, as youth leaders, we are tasked with the responsibility of doing more. We have to do more. And I know Shanice will speak about the importance of us now tailoring our projects, our activism, our resources, our activity within the social space, and understanding the importance now of utilizing our platforms, not just for memes, not just to be active in a personal sense, but be mindful that everything that we post now is not only a representation of our personal beliefs, but can also be attached to the different portfolios that we represent. And I know a lot of us would have been on social media over the couple of weeks, and we have seen how intense the politics in Trinidad would have been in terms of the commentary, the feedback, the comments on Facebook, and the memes and the statuses that would have been posted, and how as young persons we now have to be more mindful of how our various portfolios allow us to be able to do certain things. Now, it is not an excuse for us to not be accountable to other persons when we see the need to, but it also encourages us to be mindful that we are now more than ever in a space where accountability and transparency and being responsible for ourselves and our community is at the forefront of how we engage persons. This really enables us to increase our inclusion, but still being mindful that there are still persons who we will not be able to reach because of lack of resources in technology. So we really and truly need to tailor our approach to be able to pull and pool and network, as Darrion would have said, to be able to still have that level of engagement, even though there are a lot of restrictions around how we are able to engage and the type of projects that we are able to do and the type of resources that we are able to tap into. And I'm pulling back on something that Taahir would have said again, because it's really interconnected how everything flows from the panel discussion so far. We cannot remain reliant on the government or the sectors affected in a more macro institutional approach to provide the solutions to the problems that we are seeing in society. I was at a ceremony this morning, and the director for the Division of Sport and Youth Affairs in Tobago was talking about how in the past it was really an integrated community experience for youth organizations. You saw persons, you did a lot more with less because of how close and how that family network existed under the youth councils and having that umbrella branch, and the importance of having that major network within the island to really bring everybody together so that we're able to maximize the resources that we have and expand the outreach not only nationally but across the region. Because even though we think that our problems are unique, they are really interconnected, and when we're able to reach out, as Taahir and Solange would have been used as an example, we're really able to maximize how we are able to interact and connect and provide support as youth within this new space that we have to adopt. So thank you so much, Kareem, for giving me the opportunity to speak. I look forward to the questions that we have, and I can't wait to hear about the different presenters to come.
Thank you so much, Cindy. And of course, I expected nothing less but that level of engagement. Of course, since you were, and as well since you were talking on civic engagement, so naturally, you know, I thought you raised some very pertinent points. Of course, one being this COVID-19 pandemic, which is plaguing us all over, and which we cannot leave out of the discussion at all. It continues to be something that is affecting a lot of the work on the ground as well. And as a whole, of course, it's having a serious impact on civic engagement. So I see that as being so essential. I'm so happy that you raised that because it affects youth political participation as well. So we see how these global issues, these global trends can also impact the work that we do on the ground, and global issues as well. We live in that global community. So I'm so happy that you raised that pertinent point. And of course, another one that was raised was the role of women in spaces in terms of the movements that are done, in terms of these social and civic engagements. Very often women are the ones who mobilize these movements. They are the powerhouses and the building blocks that support these movements, yet still they are very often left out in terms of recognition when it comes to you know, the people coming to the forefront and saying who started or who continue to make sure that the movement well, moves along. So I'm really happy that you raised that point as well, and we know that this is the case, especially with things like the Black Power movement in 1970 in Trinidad and Tobago. Women were actually a very important part of that mobilization campaign, and many other campaigns across the entire country and across the entire region. So I'm happy that you raised that, and I want to move almost immediately into the next speaker's points as she continues this conversation around civic engagement, and that is Ms. Shanice Webb. And she's the president of the Trinidad Youth Council. Shanice Webb is the president of the Trinidad Youth Council. She also serves as a youth advisory to the United Nations Population Fund. Ms. Webb holds a BSc in Management Studies with a minor in Communication Studies and is currently pursuing her master's in International Strategic Marketing. One of her main passions is helping the youth achieve their fullest potential. And we expect nothing less from the president of the Trinidad Youth Council. So I'm very happy that she's on board with us as well. I always enjoy speaking with Shanice and having conversations with her. She always, you know, opens up our eyes to new possibilities and also highlights some of the many issues that we face as youth leaders within certain spaces. So I'm very happy that she's on board with us here this afternoon, and I look forward to her contributions. Shanice, over to you.
Thank you, Darrion. I would just like to start off by saying thank you to the Guild, specifically to the Vice President, Kareem Charles, and also the President, Wendell. So what I'd like to say is that it's really interesting and it's very heartwarming to see the Guild really embrace International Youth Day and really embrace it because we have worked with them in the past, and seeing them embrace this day and have an event and stuff like that, I think is really important. Not just standing on student issues, but also standing on youth issues as well in the broader national context. I think that's something that has been, you know, very apparent over the years in terms of the Guild of Students speaking to national issues in Trinidad and Tobago. So in terms of my presentation, I'd like to explore civic action, as a force that is able to change social structures and the organization of a society. And when we talk about social structures, we're talking about things like the wealth gap, income inequality, gender-based violence, criminal justice reform. Those are some of the key issues that we have been able to speak on as young people in Trinidad and Tobago and continue to work towards improvement on. Civic action can be referred to as enabling people to ensure policymakers hear their voices, to build knowledge on important issues and take action through campaigns for change of behavior for public and private institutions, to citizens becoming more active members in their community. Organized activism of citizens in public policy or active citizenship is one of the most important activities of any contemporary society. Citizens organize in a variety of forms, operate on public policy to promote or have rights recognized, take care of tangible social and common goods, support the empowerment of individuals or groups in conditions of weakness or marginality through advocacy and service. So just to give some examples of different youth-led civic action throughout the years, as Darrion would have mentioned, the Black Power movement in the 1970s, which would have celebrated 50 years here in Trinidad and Tobago. And it has really was a very instrumental in terms of creating change on a very national level, whereby we saw the nationalization of different companies here in Trinidad, which would have been privately owned previously. And we would have also seen changes in the banking and finance sector, where we see the Black Power movement would have spoken out about the lack of employment of Black young people in the banking sector. And we would have also seen the establishment of the first indigenous bank in Trinidad and Tobago as a result of those actions. And those actions were also led by students, right? We would have seen leaders in the fight at that time, persons like McCandle Dagger, you know, really and truly giving a voice to young people. So on a local and also regional level, we would have seen the Vote Like a Boss campaign that would have been started in Guyana in 2014 and also would have spread throughout the region and also throughout the world, being implemented in different parts of Africa as well. And you know, the interconnectedness of our society is very evident in the fact that we are able to use technology to really connect with one another. And most recently, we would have had locally the Youth Voice Matter platform being established, Darrion being one of the main facilitators and being a part of driving that agenda forward. And we would have seen, you know, that partnership and kind of building off of the experiences of the other countries and being able to connect on a regional level. So we're able to say, okay, we saw this happening in Guyana, how can we implement it here? How can we adapt it for our own action? And that's what's important, to really learn from best practices and build on it. And also, we would have seen recently the Black Lives Matter movement spring up in the US, speaking out against racial injustice and police violence. And we would have seen during the period of COVID, which George Floyd, really and truly the brutality that's been experienced there. And we saw that the world rose up and was able to say, we're not going to stand for this any longer. And a lot of countries stood in solidarity with these young people on the ground, really pushing the agenda forward. We saw marches across the globe, places in Europe, even here in the Caribbean and Trinidad and Tobago, there were different protests, and there was even, you know, strong protest actions by members of the Port of Spain community, Mova, Labantil, really speaking out against police brutality in Trinidad and their experiences. And so I think that is important, to really and truly connect and being able to learn from one another is a key aspect of it. We saw in 2010 with the Arab Springs, right? And for some, Twitter and Facebook embody stereotypes of a disconnected smartphone-toting young person. But during the 2010 Arab Spring, social media helped youth to organize an unprecedented revolution that started in Tunisia, spread to Egypt, Libya, Yemen, Syria, Bahrain, and other Middle Eastern countries. And also my final example is the indigenous water riots, also known as the Lakota access pipeline, where we saw Indigenous youth really truly stand up for their community and stand up for their own, for their space, for their lands, for their ancestral home, and saying that they would not allow such a pipeline to go down. All right, and so a quote from one of the youth activists, Michaela Iron Shell Dominguez, was, "Youth are tired of thinking that they don't have a future." And I think that's something that we could all connect to. And I think a lot of young people here in Trinidad and across the region feel like, there's a lot of young people have a certain level of lack of hope in terms of what the future really presents for them. And I think that's part of what we need to be able to do and to address, is like creating hope and showing that, there can be progress for young people across the world. So there are different types of ways that people can engage in civic action. And a lot of persons would have spoken about this before in terms of engaging with the voting process. That is key and critical. Just a bit of my experience, because I worked as a polling clerk for elections this year. And something that, was really important was, people spoke about registering to vote, right? And to a certain extent, we take it for granted that my name on the list and I'll get my polling card from EDC. But that's not necessarily true. We saw that a lot of young people, names would, like they weren't on the list. And so you come to the wrong polling station because your family normally votes there. So I think that kind of created a barrier for some young people to be able to vote. And also, when you come to the polling station at 5 o'clock and you're at the wrong polling station, you need to get to somewhere else, it's difficult for you to be able to vote. So I think we need to really look at what are some of the simple barriers that we could really address in terms of getting young people out to vote. So also another way that you can engage in civic action is being an active member in a group or association that is aligned with your values. And most importantly, it's really about being an active member and actually participating, not just to join a group, but how do you participate with that group and really and truly let it be aligned with something that you're passionate about, so that you're really gaining knowledge and actually learning from the process. So there's also symbolic and non-participation / boycotting. So a lot of times you can make a statement by the way you use your dollar. If it is you're against certain things, or you see companies behave in a certain way that you don't agree, I think as an individual and collectively as a society, we can use the power of our dollar to say no to certain actions. Also, provide developing community solutions. It's not just about identifying what problems are, but really critical that we create solutions. And how can we all work together to develop these solutions? And just to go through other few examples, it's important to contact your officials. The elections are over, yes. Someone would have won in your particular area, whether you voted for them or not. But it's important that we hold them accountable to whatever it is that they would have stated that they would represent, that they're going to represent you, and what are the different issues they're going to work towards. It's important that we hold them accountable to those things and make sure that they actually represent us. So it's important that we stay in contact with them, reach out to them and make sure that they are aware of the different issues in the communities. Also contacting the media. Amilcar would have spoken about, doing different reports, press releases, those types of things, making sure that you share the work that you're doing, right? Sharing your issues so that it becomes available in the public space. And also, it's important that you do fundraising, whether it's for different initiatives, make sure you support different campaigns that you believe in. You can write petitions, conduct canvassing, protest actions, and also running for political office. A lot of young people are very disenchanted with it, but unless we're a part of the process, who's going to really make that change? So it's important that once it is that you feel that you are able to represent your community well, I think it's important that we also seek out that avenue of political representation. So in closing, civic action is very critical to creating social change. A lot of times people ask, okay, well, why can't you just, do it yourself? Why do you have to depend on the government? But in all realities, social groups civic society do not have the resources available to them to really create sustainable actions on a specific skill that is required on a national level. You know, so groups can conduct different activities, but to really have scale, you need to have the support of the government and also the business community in certain aspects. So I would like to encourage young people to continue to participate in the different activities that you're doing. I think that over the last couple of days, we've seen a lot of young people really express themselves in terms of, you know, what they want to see Trinidad and Tobago develop and become. You know, and I think that's important that we continue that process, engaging young people and actually, you know, speaking out about the different issues that we see as important and really challenge those in power to really do what they're required to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Shanice. And I thought you raised some very pertinent points inside there as well, especially talking about things like lack of resources and the importance of social media in these spaces and spheres, as well as tools towards increasing civic engagement, because we oftentimes talk about the on the ground, but as well as social media has been a very, very extremely powerful tool in mobilizing people and helping people realize certain things as well. So I thought that was so essential that you highlighted there. Of course, now guys, on the Facebook stream, we are open for questions. Of course, we spoke about youth political participation, and we also spoke about civic engagement. So two topics have come to the forefront, and we are now open for questions. So we invite questions from our Facebook viewing audience, essential for the four panelists, and of course our keynote speaker as well, who has taken the time off to still be here with us and to answer any questions. So you can shoot your questions in, and we will have our panelists answer it. In fact, I have a question almost immediately for Solange. Solange, one of the things that we oftentimes see is a lack of female political participation, not only in the office, in terms of office and office holding, but also in terms of on the ground with just people who exist on the ground. One of the things and one of the ideologies that has permeated our space and our sphere is that whole idea that a woman should only be seen and not heard. And very often, a lot of women within spaces find it very difficult to have their voice heard, especially when it comes to issues such as politics and political engagement. So my question almost immediately to you there is, what are the corrective measures that we can put in place to improve this situation, to ensure that women have a equal voice, not only at the highest level, but also at the on the ground level? So looking at a cultural shift and a cultural change, how do we empower the woman, the female voice in terms of politics and political engagement, both on the ground and even higher up at the highest level?
Well, Darrion, honestly, we can see it on this panel right here. Majority are female. We do have the ability to have that voice and go out there, but it is difficult. Not only as I was explaining, a youth, it's hard to be heard. As a youth and a woman, that double whammy, it is extremely difficult. But I think what we need to do is really, especially amongst ourselves, promote a more egalitarian approach. We want to see more women involved in the political process. We want to bridge the gap. We want 50-50 representation, because if a man can do it, a woman can do it 10 times better, right? We really need to just keep on pushing to have our voices heard, because there's so much out there that can really, discourage us and make us feel small. But what we need to understand is, if we don't, again, band together in numbers and keep pushing out there and pushing the boundaries, let our, inspirations be that of Mia Motley and the other prominent female voices that we are seeing in the political arena. It's a lot more than it was in the past, but we still have a really long way to go. So I think that all we really need to do as females is keep our heads high, because we have the power to change a lot within our region.
Thank you so much for that, Solange. I thought that was an excellent idea. Taahir, I wanna move across to you almost immediately as we continue that discussion around political participation. And of course, I just highlighted Solange just highlighted how we can end up with female empowerment within these spheres and within these places. But I want to get an idea, what is your opinion, Taahir, on the current political systems within the Caribbean? Well, how do you feel about them currently?
Well, as you know, we've had the political system throughout the Caribbean, which has not been changed or revamped for a very long time. So as I would have made mention to, a lot of our systems are 1980 systems in a 2020 world. So I think in the Caribbean, we have a serious issue of revamping and maintenance issues, keeping it changing, keeping it evolving. And with this being said, the system needs a slight tweaking. They may not need a full-on change, but a slight tweaking where you can have greater participation from different sectors of society. All facets of society must have a chance to participate in the political process, regardless of your race, regardless of your color, regardless of your economic background, and regardless of your religion. They should all have a fair chance to participate within the political process in any of the countries, because far too many times we put our differences in opinion, differences in color, differences in too many distractions to the fore. We do not look at the character of a person. We must look at the character of a person and build out from there, regardless of what color you are, regardless of what you are. And this is seen in Guyana, for example, the other day, and they have a notion in Barbados about Trinidad where you would say the blacks vote for the blacks and the Indians vote for the Indians. But you should vote based on who will bring benefit to yourself and to your community and your spaces around you a little better on a personal level.
I'm glad that you actually highlighted that here, speaking a little bit about the distractions that we see coming out, and you put it in your words, right? And this is in reference to people voting based on race, people voting based on ethnicity, people voting based on religion, and all the other discriminatory ways in which people vote. And almost immediately, the question comes to the forefront, you know, that what happens when this happens, and of course one of the things that we see is the marginalization of certain groups. And when there's the marginalization of certain groups, they have to shout and almost you know, try to get their voice heard. And one of the ways and the methodologies in which we see this happening is, of course, through the protests. And this then leads me into my next question I'd like to address to Cindy. Cindy, how do you feel about the current forms of protest that we are seeing? Of course, it's under a lot of scrutiny, and a lot of criticisms have been coming because they're seeing that these protests are getting very violent across the globe. And they're seeing some people say that how they are not grounded in a solid direction, etc. You know, these are the mixed views that we have coming in. Of course, the ignorant views on some ends as well that we have coming in. So my question, almost immediately to you, Cindy, is what is the correct form of protest? Is there a correct form of protest? How do we protest? That's my question to you.
Thank you for that question, Darrion. I think that it's important for us to come from a place of understanding that there is not just one standard way to protest. Protesting, advocating, any form of activism would exist on different platforms, within different mediums, within different levels. There are levels and stages that often are linear or even, let's say, cyclical in the way that they occur. Now, we would have seen the structured diplomatic forms of activism to some issues. We would have seen the riots, the protests, whether it be silent or even physical and violent to some extent. And we must acknowledge that sometimes when people feel unheard by taking the traditional avenue of writing a letter, going to the office and sitting down and having a meeting, it will escalate to a point where people feel the need to make a physical stand in a large gathering or in mass groups in order to have some sort of change. And we cannot undermine the importance, the significance, or even the power of these levels of protest, these forms of protest, because they have provided results over the years. And when we look at the Caribbean culture, a lot of these things that we would have been able to gain in terms of our emancipation or independence was not because we sat and wrote a letter to get it. When we look at how our enslaved ancestors would have advocated or used their form of activism in order to get where we are today, it was not because they would have come together. For the most part, as a collective and wrote letters because it was illegal for them to read and write to begin with. And spoke to the master because it would have been disrespectful for them to even have any level of discussion with their slave owner to say that they would like to seek some sort of change. Sometimes it requires you to be radical. Sometimes change requires you to become unorthodox in your approach in order to get the necessary results. And we should not undermine it, or we should not take away from the importance and the significance that these types of activism allow for us to move forward within our different channels. I think they are very important. We must remember that there are different ways to do things, and although you may not agree with it, when you approach a situation acknowledging the wide perspective that it allows, you're able to appreciate that how when we look at the collective, when we bring together all the different avenues that are taken, the formal, the informal, the traditional, the radical, and the unorthodox, they contribute to us having the whole successful movement.
Cindy, such a powerful contribution there from you, of course, talking about protest and protest action, and how do we go about, and if there's an incorrect way to protest, and from your standpoint, there isn't any incorrect way to protest, and I want to agree with that. I don't think that there's any incorrect way to protest. I believe that a protest must have one aim, and that is for your voice to be heard, and also for those who hold the realms of power to be able to realize that there are people speaking up from the grassroots level, etc., against the injustices that are put against them, that are pinned against them. And that is one of the most essential things with the protest and protest action. So I'm so happy that you raised that point. But of course, I think we can agree here, Cindy, that after that initial phase of protesting, whether it be radical or whether it be in a more team manner, or whatever the case may be, there must be a suggestion that comes to the forefront. There must be something that pops up, or a group has to take up the initiative now to really push the agenda forward by trying to, whether it be policy revisions, etc., all these things, and challenging the system, that they must go this route. However, one of the things that we would have heard coming out prior in one of the discussions, of course, from Shanice, is the fact that a lot of these civic engagement groups, who are supposed to be the groups who are responsible for carrying forward the voice of the people after they have begun to shout, and I use shout very loosely there as well, but after they have begun to speak out, I should rather say, they've begun to speak out against their injustices and the ills that are pinned against them. There are these civic engagement groups who are supposed to be the catalysts for the change to take place, who are supposed to push the policy discussions, etc., and move those discussions along. But one of the things that Shanice would have highlighted was the fact that there's a lack of resources and funding, whether it be from the private or the public sector, towards the civic engagement groups. And sometimes you need funding to assist in your research and development, etc. But one of the issues with receiving funding as well is very often these youth organizations or youth civic engagement organizations are forced to conform to an agenda that is put forward by the sponsor who's giving money or who's giving funds to these civic engagement groups. So Shanice, my question almost immediately to you is, how do we navigate that? How do we get away from that? How do we maintain our integrity within these groups, within these organizations, if we are giving a certain level of funding? Do we resist the funding? Do we say, no, we don't want the funding from you because you have this agenda to push? Or do we try to battle back and push back against them and come to a negotiated space where we realize, all right, this is the case, and this is we received this amount of funding, but this is what we believe in, and we're going to hold steadfast to our beliefs? Shanice?
Hi, Darrion, could you just repeat the question for me a little bit, please?
Yeah, sure. I was just asking, very often when sponsorship is given or the resources are given by the private or the public sector, regardless of who it comes from, very often civic engagement groups or youth groups, youth activist groups, etc., all these different groups, civic engagement groups, are forced to conform to a certain agenda put forward by the sponsor. So my question to you is, what do we do in a case like that? If we're leading an organization, if we form part of an organization, do we try to negotiate to find a common ground? Do we stand and say that these are our beliefs, this is what we believe in, and we're not going to conform, we're not going to change? How do you navigate that space?
Okay, that's a great question. I think that it depends on what the ask is. If it's something that violates your organization's core beliefs, for example, if it is like, for example, the TYC, so we wouldn't necessarily take money or support from someone that sells tobacco or a company that directly sells alcohol or receive alcohol. So, because that goes against, you know, our core beliefs, because for young people, you know what I mean? So in a situation like that, we would either step away from that situation, or depending on what it is, we would find some level of common ground. You know, so you have to be able to decide what is your non-negotiable as an organization, because all money isn't good money, and therefore you need to decide, okay, am I willing to connect myself or connect my organization to this institution and believe what they believe? Because that's in essence what you're saying and what you're doing there. So if it is that it goes directly against your core principles, or what they're asking you to do is a betrayal of your core principles, I think that you need to step away and find another solution, find a way to raise the fund in some other way or whatever. I think that, you know, a lot of times it's enticing when, you know, you're offered money to do certain things or whatever, but you need to decide. So if it is that, it's just that, okay, a lot of times what happens is a funder would say, we're funding projects along this specific line, you know. So if it is that you're able to now tailor a project to incorporate what it is that they want to sponsor, I think that's fine. For example, if it is that, you know, they're supporting projects around education, you know, and you wanted to do something around sport, then you find an innovative way to say, okay, how do I incorporate sport and education together, and therefore I'm able to meet my needs and also the competitors' needs. So it's a way to find a win-win for both parties. It should not be a compromise, because I think when you compromise, you end up losing, you know what I mean? So either it's a lose-lose where we do not continue with this, or we find a win-win solution for both parties.
Thank you so much, Shanice. And I feel like if I share the same ideology there, is of course not compromising your core beliefs, but looking towards negotiating certain spaces or certain places in terms of whatever their agenda is. You know, once, as long as it's moral and it's ethical, we can find a compromise, right? And I see the Guild president as well agreeing with that. Warren Anderson, he says, take the funding and make it work in the intended area. You know, that's exactly why we need the partner, and you have a division of labor, etc. He's talking about, of course, sharing of the burdens and moving in the right direction and finding those partners, or connecting partners as well to certain sponsors who might be doing work in certain areas. So I see that as being so essential. Thank you to the panelists who have gone before. Thank you for answering some of the questions that I had weighing heavily on my mind that I wanted to just pitch to you all. And of course, as we speak around political engagement, as we speak around civic engagement, one of the things that we really need to do, and I see as being extremely important and necessary, is of course an examination of our future. Where do we go from here? So we have an understanding of the shortcomings of the system in terms of youth political participation, in terms of civic engagement. We have that understanding. We've had you all share on all the struggles and the issues and the social issues that continue to permeate the space and that continue to find itself infecting the space. But we must now have a plan to carry us forward and to carry the youth movement forward as well. And very often that plan begins with an examination of the economics of the future. And topic 3, of course, in this panel discussion that we have here is going to be the economic future of the youth in the region, and examining the economic future of the youth in the region as well. And of course, we understand how civic engagement and youth political participation ties into that overarching concept of the economic future as well. And we have none other than the presenter, Ms. Rukiah Scott, who's a very dynamic speaker, very engaging speaker as well. She's the president of the Economic Society of UWI. Rukiah Scott is a current undergraduate student at the University of the West Indies, pursuing a BSc in economics with a minor in environmental economics. Rukiah is a vibrant and dynamic young woman who believes and works intentionally to ensure that young people are represented and heard in our society, both locally and internationally. She's the head trainer of the Model United Nations program, writer for the Commonwealth Youth Council, professional development director and public relations officer of the Rotary Club of Central Port of Spain, and a former Trinidad and Tobago youth ambassador to the United States. Rakaya is also the president of the Economics Society of UWI and vice chair of the Caribbean Women in Leadership Trinidad and Tobago National Chapter. With a passion for economics and her zeal for making the world a better place, Rakaya believes that through her academic studies and civic engagement involvements, she can bridge the gap and use economics to solve many of the problems faced in our society. And we do know that a lot of our problems do stem from economic issues. And I'm very happy that she's agreed to be part of this panel as well. I've worked alongside her, I've been on many panels with her, and I know that she's a very powerful speaker, that she's a very dynamic individual, and that her contributions will definitely be very thought-provoking as we continue along in this virtual symposium held by the Guild of Students, and of course hosted by the Guild Vice President Office, and of course Guild Vice President Kareem. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you all on to our final presenter on this panel this afternoon, Ms. Rakaya Scott, the President of the Economic Society at the University of the West Indies. Rakaya, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon to everyone who is watching us live on Facebook right now. I must say the discussion so far has been really fruitful in terms of civic engagement and political participation. So today I'm just going to offer a slightly different perspective as we analyze the economic landscape of young people in the Caribbean and a bit about our economic future and how we can participate in that. So just to give a background of where are we currently in terms of economics and youth. So young people make up approximately 40% of the population globally. And like we might think that doesn't sound like much, but as an economics person, numbers is everything. So let's say that, the goal was for us to have $1 million each. And then someone tells you, well, you could only have 40% of that. 40% of that is $400,000. Imagine if we each had $400,000. I mean, I don't know if some of them balling so, but I definitely not. And I know if I had $400,000 right now, that would definitely be great, So that it just goes to show that even though a percentage may not be as big as we would like it to be, we are still in numbers. And with any group of people, you have certain circumstances which may either limit them or make them progress. So when we speak about economics, I would like to introduce you guys to a concept, developmental economics, which is the overarching theme that I'll be using today to kind of break down what's going on labor-wise, health-wise, and socioeconomically. So young people tend to experience the same issues. So we have unemployment, underemployment, and lower wages, poverty, education, health violence, and migration. So in terms of unemployment, youth unemployment in the Caribbean is very high. And youth underemployment is also very high. And as a result, that happens when you're qualified for a job, but you get employed something under your pay grade or even experience. And low wages obviously leads into you not being where you would like to be financially. And that can lead into poverty, and especially when we take into consideration that in Trinidad and Tobago, we do have a divide in terms of urban residency and rural residency, where you have young people living in rural areas, and it's not the same lifestyle at all as if you were to operate in an urban setting. And that will drastically change your jobs, it would change your lifestyle, and it would change the amount of physical cash that you would have on hand. But when we talk about underemployment, it speaks to the fact that young people actually are way more educated as our older folks would have been in the past. And that's because education is way more accessible now. In Trinidad and Tobago, we're very fortunate to have equal access, though the quality differs significantly, especially when you move from urban to rural. And when you look at gentrified areas and stuff like that, even within urban spaces, we're generally, we have higher academic skills than our, older generations. But looking at it from a labor economics point of view, we have the professional labor, semi-skilled labor, skilled labor, and unskilled labor. And young people, they span across this section of labor. And what that means is that young people can actually occupy any industry, any sector, and that in itself is very important, because it means that young people cannot just be confined to one singular space, right? But in terms of that being the overarching problem, young people, we can't get jobs, we can't become entrepreneurs that easily. What's the solution? We have either one of two things, right? One, we fight and we struggle and we work extra hard to make it where we want to be, and then we go and preach to other people that if you want to make it in life, you must struggle and you must do this and you must do that. Or the second option, which is to get involved economically, politically, and make the change from the top so that we don't have to experience these issues. The reality is that economics is sort of like the umbrella. We exist in an economy. Your community is an economy. Your house is a small economy. And the rules and regulations that govern your house or your community is essentially going to impact on your actions or how your lifestyle is, which is why it's very important for young people to take control of their economic future. But one might say that, but I don't know how to do that. I don't really know if I can go out there. I don't even know if I have the skills to develop my economic future. So what's the solution? When we talk about a stable economic future, we talk about two things: economic growth and economic development. In simple terms, economic growth is when you're producing and you're producing more and more and more and more every year. Now, let's say all of us are entrepreneurs here involved in different economies, the orange economy, green economy, and the blue economy, and we're involved in some sort of making some product or providing some service. We are in fact contributing to GDP. The more we become entrepreneurs, the more we follow our passions and we do something. Let's say that I like to do nails. I'm providing a service, it's a product. I'm contributing to the GDP. I'm growing my economy in my very own way. And that is the power that we have as young people when we follow our passions, because as we can see, we have an issue in Trinidad and Tobago where we depended on one sector to earn our revenue for far too long, and look at what situation it has us in. And that's because we deterred in our parents' generation, we deterred them from following their aspirations and we forced them into certain sectors, and look at how that turned out. Young people were educated across so many different fields that we no longer have that same pressure. It still exists, but we're no longer as pressured as our parents would have been. So the next thing is economic development. And that simply means that we try to improve the circumstances of not just one sector, but majority of sectors in the economy. Now, the orange economy, the green economy, and the blue economy, these are sectors where that are non-traditional. But if you, as an actor, as a singer, you start your own business, whether it's a production company, an acting company, or whatever it may be, you're developing the orange economy. And when you develop the orange economy, you not only grow the economy, but you develop the economy, which in itself makes the economy stronger and more stabilized. And I think as young people, it's very important for us to understand that every action that we do has a long-term effect on the economy. So we talked earlier about, youth getting involved in political participation, youth getting involved in civic engagement, and we can do so through different means. We can do so through art, we can do so through culture, and just so many other avenues. And whilst we're getting involved politically, we're also developing the economy. And I think young people, we're in a position where we can do that way more comfortably. But with that being said, it may not be as easy for anybody to become an entrepreneur. And that is why we need to focus on holding the authorities that are supposed to provide the environment for us to be able to flourish. We need to hold them accountable. So when we talk about our economic future, it's very important that whilst we're becoming politically involved, we need to ensure that we are encouraging our leaders and whoever is in charge. It could be different authorities, it could even be the private sector, to understand that I have an economic contribution to make. And if you allow me the environment to make that economic contribution, I will be able to stabilize the economy in such a way that long term it's going to impact all of us. So that's basically what I wanted to say in terms of our economic future, is that we do have a lot of power, but we need to understand that our power lies in our decisions that we make collectively. And if I may just touch on young people, really, we need to ensure to educate ourselves on these things. I understand that politics, civic engagement, economics may not be everybody's cup of tea, and we might like to comfortably exist in our own spaces. But the thing is, and I'm sure everybody could agree with us here, that we see a lot of people trying to reinvent the wheel and kind of spinning top in mud, because everybody is trying to do something that they think is actually going to help, but it actually doesn't, because we don't understand what's going on at the top. We don't understand our political structures. We don't understand our economic structures. And sometimes, because I see a lot of people talking about we need to give economic power to small entrepreneurs, but at the same time they would talk about, but we cannot boycott large and monopolized industries because they employ persons at the grassroots. And if you actually think about it from an economic perspective, that's two very contradictory views. So if you want to merge that together, you're actually going to make the problem even worse, which is why I think this year what I'm looking forward for in terms of education is really educating young people in terms of economics, in terms of politics, governance, so that we would know exactly how to navigate the space. Because what's happening is that we're reinventing the wheel way too much, and we're not bringing anything substantial to the table. And to those who are, a huge congratulations. And you know, I really commend the young people that are taking the necessary strides in terms of securing our economic future. But the reality is, without the education, without the opportunity, and without the exposure, we won't really be able to secure the economic future that we want to create. So in closing, what I would like to say is that, you know, young people, we have the passions, we have the power to create the change that we would want to see economically. And it's very important that we contribute to economic growth and development in our own ways. Because if the economy doesn't grow and if the economy doesn't develop, there's nothing else, no matter how much we try, there's nothing else that's really going to happen. You may love to sing, you may love to dance, and you might want opportunities, but if the economy is not consistently growing or consistently developing, it's going to be extremely difficult for us. And especially with COVID-19, we need to make sure that whatever we're doing, and we need to ensure that, you know, the education is there so that we can, all in our very own little ways, develop the economy further so that it just makes our lives a bit easier. Come on, guys, nobody should have to struggle that hard to get across in life. Yeah, we all have challenges. Challenges are going to come, but we live in a very small island. We live in probably one of the best parts in the world, according to some people. We really shouldn't have to struggle that hard when it's actually this easy to achieve what we want to do. So hold the states accountable and ensure that they're making the right environment for economic growth and development to prosper. Yeah, that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rakaya. You know, almost immediately from your excellent presentation there, one of the things that you would have highlighted is, of course, that whole aspect of unemployment and underemployment, etc. And then one of the solutions that you proposed to correct that is, of course, diversification. You know, from a personal perspective here, my business is in the orange economy. And I see we have a question coming out from Nathaniel John as well in the comment section. He says, how do we encourage our youth who are in the orange economy to remain within the country or region? Many times, many find that they don't get the support locally. And that's one of the things that I also struggle with. My business is in the orange economy. During this COVID-19 pandemic, I've taken a serious hit. I've lost a lot of income, right, that I would usually have around this time. So my disposable income has reduced drastically. My question to you is how do we really support this whole ideology around diversification, and hopefully you can answer Nathaniel's question as well. How do we encourage our youth who are in the orange economy, but not only in the orange economy, orange and green and the blue economies, etc., where there's so many more opportunities outside? How do we encourage them to stay here? What methods should we put in place?
I mean, I love this question, and there's the answer is literally a series of things that needs to happen. So obviously there is the obvious. You need to stick to your passion. You need to do what you do, market yourself, network yourself, etc. What is also very important is if you don't have the correct economic policy to back it up, no matter what you do is not going to be sustained. So it's the same way, like if I start an NGO and it's about, let's say, donating stationery to students in schools, but I'm not actively doing anything to ensure that we don't have the problem at all, year after year after year, for the next 50 years, I'm going to be doing the same thing. We're going to be having the same problem. So there's actually something with respect to the orange economy specifically. What needs to happen is that our cultural policy actually needs to be something that is stamped. It needs to be something that is implemented, because if we have a cultural policy, it is going to create a much more comfortable and workable space for creatives in a way that they don't have to feel that they have to go abroad in order to get their talents monetized or heard or get that exposure. And then how do we get that cultural policy stamped? Because I know it's in the works, because, you know, I would have heard discussions and stuff that it is in the works through the Ministry of Arts and Culture. But how do we really ensure that this cultural policy is actually, you know, stamped and signed and sealed? And it comes back to, and I know it's probably too late, but you could have voted for Tuna Boy, you know. You could have paid attention. This is why we have to be accountable, you know. Young people need to be accountable and educated. You need to look at the manifestos and see, all right, who is going to work on this cultural policy? Who is going to work on the educational policy? So that when I vote for that person, I know it's going to come into play. And once that policy is passed, once it's consulted with the public and we know what we want in the policy, and it's passed, then I know as a creative that I don't have to worry about being able to monetize, you know, my craft. So for me, what I would tell young people to do is that if you have a craft, whether that's in the orange, blue, or green economies, and you really feel as though you're not getting the avenues, and you're really feeling demotivated, just know that the solution really does come from a micro and macro perspective. And if it is you doing the micro, I would urge you very much to kind of tackle it from the macro. Write your MP, write your prime minister, write your president, contact the ministry, because ministries do consultations, you know. They're just not advertised in the best way, but they do consultations. You need to pay attention to these things, because once you have the correct framework, you'd be able to like accomplish all of these things. But keep on it, and keep on it from both a micro and macro level. And that's the only way I personally see it happen. That's what I would say to anyone who are in these economies, for sure.
Thank you so much, Rakaya, for that contribution. And you raised a very pertinent point there, of course, around policy development and, you know, the construction of policy. And I want to bring Amilcar back into the conversation here almost immediately, because I haven't heard from him in a while, right, since the keynote address. But Amilcar, one of the things that we see with the development of all these policies, of the youth policy, of the cultural policy, etc., is the difficulty in really having an inclusive policy where everybody has a voice at the table. My question to you immediately, Amilcar, is how do we really go about having a fully inclusive policy? Is it possible to have a fully inclusive policy? These are the questions and the concerns that I have. What is the method or the way in which we should go about constructing these policies?
For sure. Well, on one level, we see that we do have a policy that guides us. It has been up in the process, being drafted, reworked, and very established academics, to whom Darrion would know some, are involved in leading that process. But the interesting thing is that in terms of the implementing agencies, a lot of that rests almost solely in the state, where they get a disbursement and then it goes through different groups. Fundamentally, the resources go around national festivals and support for particular groups that do the work that we understand. The cultural industries, what people talk about the orange economy now, we have to see it from an ecological perspective. How does animation fit into that? Animation is also part of design and innovation. And the type of support that we could involve to create incubators for that type of talent. Now we have it. People outsource their talent. I don't think artists are actually flying out here en masse. So I disagree with that view. But what we do see is that they're not being cultivated in certain ways. So the choice for being an artist becomes much harder, as it is in many other societies. What we need to do is create an environment where the choice is less difficult. So with the cultural policy we speak about, do we have a publishing policy, which looks at how much books we create in the society for a year? What kind of support we give to authors? What kind of audiences? How many readings do we want? Or is this just for the domain of the Bocas Lit Fest and trying to make sure that we have a reading public around our literary arts? Do we look at, like, for example, an arts council? We've seen an example a little bit more familiar with, like, Toronto Arts Council. How much of our tax dollars go into investments in culture? That is a conversation we could have through the reports. We see it. And does culture mean events, or is it the public consumption of culture? How do we think about space between how much art must we interact with in terms of the size of the country? Where do festivals get distributed geographically? Because it is no surprise that most of the literary events are centered in Port of Spain. And one of the biggest challenges, for example, why cultural policy is important is things like prize monies around major carnival competitions. For example, the differences between Calypso with the Marsh Gras, Soca Monarch, and the Chutney Soca Monarch, and the way that the state funds this and the type of relationships that they have with private entrepreneurs. So these are the conversations that must be part of a cultural policy. They happen. Young people need to articulate what are their mandate, what are their issues, develop a mandate, and then try to shape that conversation much more than saying, we want more for the arts. What does that mean? And we need to empower some of the young persons like yourself, Darrion, who are involved with cultural policy, involved with cultural administration and management, to also help artists so that artists could focus on creating good art, and cultural policy could focus on creating good policy, and administrators focus on creating great administration.
Thanks so much for that, Amilcar. And I feel as if we're talking about, of course, increasing participation in all these discussions as well, but also developing the skill set and the strengthening of skill sets as well. And we have a question actually coming in from Ashley that I'd like to pose to Taahir here. How important do you think student leadership is in the preparation for political participation? So that question going out there, and this of course is all encompassing, just drawing on what Amilcar would have said, what Ruqayyah would have said when we're speaking about policy development, etc. Do we think that student leadership plays into these things, and of course all the magnitude of all the other things under the umbrella and skill sets under the umbrella that you develop in terms of future political participation? So Taahir, the question to you is, how important do you think student leadership is in the preparation for political participation?
I think it's a very, very good question, and I must commend her for asking it. Student leadership is very important. We're the ones that are currently studying and specializing in the various fields. So we have the first-hand knowledge of what's taking place in the world today. And the experience you would gain, I saw one of the other questions being the experience of being on the Guild and what role the Guild can play. The role the Guild and student leaders have in networking and voicing their opinions and the spaces they go into is tremendous in guiding the policy framework and developing the country that we're in. Because, as I said, we have the first-hand knowledge of what's taking place. Meanwhile, the persons that are sitting in these positions prove to put forward developmental plans and policies which proves not to be sustainable, which have no binding in the world today. And I will go back to the original point, I feel like repeating myself, 1980 systems working in the 2020 world, and it cannot continue like that. So when policies are being developed, all the stakeholders have to be involved, and when development is taking place, the stakeholders have to be involved, and these stakeholders include the youth and must include the youth. And as long as this takes place, we can continue beginning to see that development and policy framework and policy which would benefit all, because a policy which is taken up at a national level cannot only benefit some, they have to benefit all. And youth participation and youth leadership must be involved, youth leaders must be involved in guiding this framework and guiding this policy.
Thanks a lot for that, Taahir. And following up with that question from the same person, Ashley, she asks, and I want to pose this question to Solange, what roles do you think that the Guild can play in ensuring that there are women participating in leadership, or to ensure that there's an increase in women participation in leadership?
Well, again, it kind of follows up along the lines of the previous question that you would have asked me. But I think it is super important. Actually, the last Guild elections that UWI would have had, I ran for a post, and I was really amazed to see the amount of females that were running for executive positions within the Guild. And currently, one is holding a position, I believe it's the treasurer, that is, yes? So, you know, we just need to keep encouraging our men to just go out there right? And get it done.
Thank you so much for that, Solange.
If I may, Chair.
Yeah, sure, Taahir.
I think last year was the first time at Cave Hill they had an all-girl executive. And at Mona, it was a similar situation where it wasn't fully female, but the president and the vice president and the secretary of the Mona Guild was female. As well here at Cave Hill, we had a female executive where the postgrad rep, the president, the secretary, the treasurer, you name it. We had, and it was majority of the guild last year at Cave Hill was female. And I must commend the females for coming forward and taking up the mantle in these leadership positions, which was something in the past would not have been done and would not have been noticed.
Thanks so much for that contribution there as well, Taahir. We have another question coming in here. With the pandemic, what do you think needs to be done to get the country onto an established path of recovery and eventually growth? So there's a question coming out here. With the pandemic, what do you think needs to be done to get the country onto an established path of recovery and eventually growth? Maybe Cindy, you might want to tackle this one.
I was actually thinking that Shanice would tackle it because she's on the recovery committee and she would be able to better tailor her contribution to that, or maybe Kai.
Perfect. Shanice, you wanna tackle this one?
Yes, certainly. I think that for our recovery in Trinidad and Tobago, I think it's important that we all come together as a nation. I think we pay lip service to it, but I think it's very key at this time as we look at the election that just happened and the split in terms of what the voting split was. It's almost half and half, and therefore the opposition needs to work with the government to be able to, really and truly enact different policies. So I think on that macro level, I think that's what's important. But also I think that the Prime Minister needs to be able to articulate their vision, and they have the report from the recovery team and all of that. So basically, how are we going to action these items and, really and truly incorporate it, not just on a governmental level, but looking at how do we involve not just the government, but also the private sector, civil society, and individuals on the ground, and making sure, okay, what type of role do we all play in terms of that coming towards our national development. We would have spoken earlier about supporting small and medium-sized businesses, which is key because they are responsible for the majority of they're responsible for a vast majority of jobs and employment in most countries, especially here in Trinidad and Tobago. So I think that is key. I think being able to support those businesses and making sure that they are sustainable and they're able to continue to grow over a period of time is critical. I think making sure that young people are involved in the process is key, making sure that young people we have that buy-in from young people, because at the end of the day, we are the ones that are responsible, really and truly to carry that burden forward in terms of making sure that, we maintain social services and things like that. So I think it's important that we continue to incorporate young people. We would have spoken about diversification. Diversification is critical. We saw it in Tobago being hit tremendously in terms of tourism. So how do we then, tourism is their main economic driver currently. How do we then promote local travel from Trinidad and Tobago and making sure that, we stimulate the growth in that way, and also embracing culture as one of our main economic products. And also, how do we then embrace technology as key, as the country remains closed. It's important that we embrace technology in very real ways. Issues of things like Wi-Fi should not be a problem. I think that we need to be able to eradicate that, not just for students, but also, on a business level as well, so that people are able to work from home effectively. Students are able to continue to learn, and we're not necessarily burdened by those things. So those are some of the key areas that we need to be able to address in specific and real ways.
All right, thanks for that, Shanice. I definitely agree with you in terms of all that you said. going forward, what I would actually really like to stress on is that we need to develop economic independence and strength. So what you would notice is that COVID-19 has actually exposed how dependent the Caribbean region is on the international community. So for example, tourism is a large revenue earner for a lot of Caribbean islands. Where do our tourists come from? The international community. When we talk about Trinidad and Tobago being one of the largest exporters of petrochemicals in the Western Hemisphere, who imports the gas from us? When we talk about our oil exports and how much revenue that brings in, who imports the oil from us? So it really does expose how dependent we are on the international community. And with COVID-19, we see that completely shut out. I mean, we can't even get simple things here now. We can't even import ink for your printer, certain types of furniture, like all of these things. So what we really need to focus on is building our production capacity and building our regional trade capacity. And that ties into what we call diversification. But I know that this is something Amilcar usually speaks about, is our system of economics and governance is just not suited for us to diversify the economy, because if we diversify the economy, things really will change, you know, and everyone is going to be able to enjoy a much comfortable life, and that does not support the hegemony that currently exists and the political and economic system that currently exists, which allows for a few to have and the majority to not have. So what we need to do going forward is that we need to educate our communities, the people around us, to let them know what the problem really is. The problem is that our structure just does not work. We want constitutional reform, but do the people who have the power really want constitutional reform? Because it's not going to really benefit them. So for me, I think we need to build on economic independence, and in order to do that, we need to be educated as to what the real issue is and hold them. I saw in the comments, somebody said it's a drama, the state. Yeah, we had a drama them, and we have to keep at it. We need to keep fighting, because it's not going to change unless the system falls. And when the system falls, that's exactly when we're going to be able to do all of these wonderful things, get rid of the technological divide, diversification, and stuff like that. So I think going forward, that's what we definitely need to do.
And I think that is the perfect way for us to come to a conclusion with our discussions as well. So as we move forward, the idea is really diversification. We see that as being a big part of our agenda as youth, on the youth agenda. So beyond just political participation, beyond just our civic engagement, to also look at the key theme being in these things, diversification of our economy, diversification of ourselves as well, coming down to the self level, to make sure that we too are well read in many different areas as youth leaders, as youth who are concerned about our country, about our region as well. We have to ensure that we continue to read the doctrine, that we continue to engage in the spaces where we are given the invitation to engage, and that we make sure that our voice is very much heard, and accountability as well, that we hold those who claim to be our leaders very accountable out there, no matter what position they hold, because at the end of the day, we have to be the ones who really manhandle the situation, or handle the situation in such a way that we really move our economy and our society forward beautifully. So I'd like to take this time now to give the vote of thanks, because by my clock it's 3:03, and as much as I would like to go on and on and on and on, and I could tell you all honestly and truly, we could be here all day discussing just all the issues within our country, within our region, within the globe as well, with this panel of experts here that we have here as well. We can go on and on and on, but unfortunately we have time frames to work within and to operate within, and I'd like to invite right now to give the vote of thanks a very dynamic lady as well, a very dynamic youth leader who I've also worked with inside the space, and I'm very happy that she's coming to give our vote of thanks. Miss Chrisette Benjamin, who's the project specialist at the office of the VP. Chrisette, all eyes are on you and all ears are on you right now.
Thank you, Darrion. It is indeed a pleasure to give the vote of thanks. I must commend the panel, and I must commend everybody who had an impact on, who contributed to this forum here today. It was truly an inspiration to me. I learned a lot. So let me start off by thanking the man with the vision, Mr. Kareem Charles, our Vice President at the UWI Guild St. Augustine campus. Thank you for giving us a platform to voice our opinions. I would like to thank UWI Marketing and Communication. Without your support, this would not have been possible. I would like to thank you, Mr. Darrion, Narine. I did not just hear you moderate, you also instill knowledge to all our viewers. So thank you for being such a dynamic moderator. Thank you to the keynote speaker. You are truly an inspiration and a mentor to all of us. So we really, really appreciated you for taking time out to speak to us. Thank you to our diverse, dynamic, and powerful youth panelists, Solange, Taahir, Cindy, Shanice, and Rukaya. You all truly instill knowledge to the youth across our country and across the region. And also in closing, I would just like to thank you, our lovely audience, for sticking by us and asking questions and really being engaged. So in closing, thank you very much and happy International Youth Day.
Thank you so much for that, Chrisette. A lovely vote of thanks. And I would just like to say my thanks as well to Kareem for having me on as a moderator. And thanks to all the panelists and our keynote speaker. You're always spectacular, and I always enjoy working alongside each and every one of you all who featured here today. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, we bring this to a close. You can feel free to reach out to all the different panelists. If you have any further questions, they are always willing to answer your questions. And it is indeed been a pleasure being here with you all on International Youth Day to moderate this panel. And special thanks to Kareem, of course, once again for hosting it. You all enjoy the rest of the International Youth Day. Remember to make sure that your voice is heard and ensure that you really get engaged with the political landscape and, of course, the civic engagement as well. So, all the best and enjoy the rest of your afternoon on this here International Youth Day.